Come on in and welcome to your Rambo Moves the Chess Adventure channel. Today we dive into pawn endings, and I like them a lot. I find them hard sometimes too because you have to calculate very precisely. Just one tempo might make all the difference. So I collected a couple of very nice examples. The first one is actually a liquidation into a pawn ending, and black to move, and the postulation is black is winning here. As this is a video about pawn endings, you might be tempted to exchange, but now you realize that the pawn on c4 will fall eventually. Black, he would like to jump to b5 now, the castle jump, but of course it's not possible because A, the king has already moved, and B, he would have to cross c5, which is under fire by this pawn, and that's illegal. And of course, the third reason is there's no rook on a5, so he cannot jump to b5 anyway. There is one clever move, and it's king c6. And it is clever because now white has two moves to react here. One would be king c2, but that's just a waiting move, and now black can exchange. And lo and behold, he has actually reached b5 and has managed to virtually jump here like in a castle's move. So now the sides are reversed, the situation is reversed. Now black is the one exerting Zugzwang, and the king has to move, and the pawn on b4 is going to fall, after which black is winning. So this is not the way to go for white. He has a better defense. After king c6, he can actually take on d4. And now he has the strong defense f4. And if black now decides to make a run for it, he is actually in time. He can really be within the square, the rule of the square. He is in time, but of course there's this pawn on the b file. One of the two will queen. The king is overloaded. So let's go back. This is not the way to go for black. How does he win though? I said that black is winning. So the correct move is g takes f4. Now that looks a little dangerous because there's g5. And this is actually the best defense of white. White is escalating the situation. But these three pawns, and that's the reason this example is included in the videos, they actually managed to win against the white king. And the theme of this example and the next one is checking. Checking in the pawn endgame. Black doesn't have to take. He can start by checking, which is the correct way to go. King d3 would be a reasonable move in many other circumstances because it's blocking the d pawn. But in this case, after f3, f2, f1, he will be in check unless, of course, he decides to follow. Let's look at it for a second. f3, let's say g6, f2. Now king e2, holding up the pawn. But now we have c2. And these two pawns are really posing a problem. g7, and now check in the pawn ending. The queen promotes with check. The pawn promotes, not the queen promotes. And there's another pawn promoting with check also. So the next move will be queen g5 or queen c4 or something, controlling the g8 square. And nothing will happen for white. Okay, so checking, 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 but white doesn't have to go to d3. In this situation, he can also go to c2. So now what happens? f3 nonetheless, g6, or let's say gh6, why not? f2, h7, and now I'm pretty sure that f1 promoting would also be quite strong, but the best move is d3 check. And now the same idea as before. If the king takes, we have a promotion with check. And of course, we can keep this pawn under control with the next move. So the king might not want to take on d3, but on c3. But now black is promoting and white is promoting, but there's a queen check on a1, skewering the queen and the king and winning easily afterwards. So this doesn't work either. So in this situation, white has only one realistic move. It's king b3. But then black can just play d2. And now he's threatening to promote with check again. h8, queening. d1 queening with check, and wherever white goes now, he will either lose his queen right away, again this motive, or he can go here and the second queen is coming with check. Let's move on. The second example, as I mentioned before, is also about checking. White to move and white to win. It looks as if it's going to be a draw because both pawns, the b pawn and the g pawn, are equally far advanced. So b6, g3, b7, g2, b8, and g1 also promoting. And this would actually be a draw. So this is not the best way to go for white. He's supposed to win this. So how can he do this? He has to gain a tempo. And the way to do it is to give a check by promoting. And that means the black king has to be maneuvered to one of these squares on the diagonal. Let's see how it is done. b6, g3, and now we follow along with the king, leaving black with no real option but king h3. If he plays king g5, the pawn is just lost. So king h3, b7, g2. Now again, if white just promotes, this will be a draw because black will promote and white cannot win this. White has a better move. He plays king f2, keeping the pawn from promoting. And if black wants to support the pawn, he is now on h2, and that was our only goal. He's now in check and will be mated in 1 or 2 moves. The next example is the first of 3 about outside passers. You can see that black is on the verge of creating an outside passer. And now is the question whether he can win this by playing c3. And the answer, no, this is not a winning idea. And the reason for it is quite interesting. White takes, black takes back, and now there's h6, very devious move, and black has really no better way to react than taking it. But now white is in time. He can collect this pawn on c3, and even the best attempt by black, which is h5, does not suffice because the black king is just too slow, needs to take his time as well, and white is back in time due to the h-pawn being a rook pawn, and the king reaches the corner, which is a well-known draw. After h6, gh6, king d3, king f4 of course doesn't work because of f6. There's a free pawn all of a sudden, and white is winning now. So what's the right way to play? The right way to play in this situation is calmly to just play h6. Now if white tries to play g5, there's nothing happening here. hg6, f6, hg5, f6, king f6, and no breakthrough for white, and king d4 is not enough because g4, and after this g3. The white king is just too slow, too late, too little, too late. Next one, outside passer the second. And this is a similar idea. White to move. Of course, first he has to take back. Something was captured there. So he takes back with a check, king e7. And now basically we have 2 moves, king e4 and h6. And many a person would be tempted to play h6. But this is too quick. Now black has to collect this pawn and he has to hurry about it. But he's now just in time to actually win this position. Black has to go a long route, and after king e7, king g5, we can see that black is winning. So h6 is premature, and that's the lesson of this and the last example. Not to rush, not to hurry. King e4 is the way to go. The interesting thing is that black needs the same amount of moves to get this pawn on h5 as he did on h6, but white has gained a valuable tempo and is on his way. So king f8, king d5, king g7, king d6, king h6, king e7, and now he has to spare this tempo. Now which pawn to take first? Now you can slip up and play king f6, but after king g4 you will start crying. Now it's a draw because white can never take on f7 because he loses his own pawn. So in this situation you have to take on f7. After king g5, only move to protect this pawn. King e6. It's reciprocal Zugzwang. And now black has to give up his pawn and will lose the remaining endgame. So the geometry of the chessboard is such that this way is 4 moves and this way is also 4 moves. But as I say, white being one tempo quicker makes all the difference. And the last example connected to this theme, to the theme of the outside passer, is this very recent game. It was played in Weg an See in the Super GM tournament, and it was played by 2 relatively young players. There was Ramesh Babu Pragnananda, the Indian Wunderkind, and the black player was Niels Grandelius, very young but strong grandmaster from Sweden. And Ramesh Babu Pragnananda was leading the game for quite some time. He had a winning position for the last 20 moves or so. And in this situation, he decided to win the ending by force. He sacrificed his d-pawn, liquidating into a pawn ending. And after king a4, king c6, which is sensible to keep the white king from entering, white just played e5. And the e-pawn is actually the outside pawn, which sounds funny because it's a center pawn, but it's outside of the action. The action is over here, and so it's an outside passer in this context. And actually, in this situation, Niels Grandelius resigned because after king d7, king b5, king e6, king b6, and king takes e5, king c5, black has lost one very important pawn, and the rest is curtains, because after king b6 and c4 to c8, white is winning. The next example is about the rule of the square, and you might think, oh, I don't see any squares here, but you will soon enough. White is to win in this example, and he starts by playing d6. Now there's the first square. Black has to enter it, because if he doesn't, the pawn will just promote the d-pawn. So king f6. Now f5, very interesting move. These 2 pawns actually keep this black king quite occupied. So there's nothing he can do. If he wants to go to g5 to support his own pawns, he will just be too slow. d7 and promotion next move. So he has to make a waiting move. But now all of a sudden we see how weak the e-pawn is. The black e-pawn is very weak and will be collected. Black again plays king f6. And now the question is, can we take the e4 pawn? Yes, we can, because we're still within the square, the other square. Let's just paint it all the way. And black has no way to outplay the king. g3, king f3, h4, and no more progress for black. But white has 3 connected pawns, and these actually do win against one king. 3 pawns, if they are on adjacent files, not as a triple pawn behind each other, they will win. So at the latest now, one can tell that one of these pawns is going to reach the 7th rank, and later the 8th rank too. And maybe you want to know what happens if black plays h4 in this case, but if white is careful, he can hold both pawns again. h3, king g3, and g3, again king f3. We have this constellation. The white king is able to control both pawns by standing next to them, but supposedly on the wrong side. And I call this constellation the Feingold finesse, because he showed in a video a game of his where this actually played a big role. It looks as if white is just going to get a new queen pretty soon, but it is black to move, and the opponent played king to d4, Ben Feingold being white. And the idea was, if white quickly and carelessly plays h6, then king d3 is actually winning, because now there's a mate on e2. the opponent of Ben Feingold, he was not really hoping for that kind of a blunder. He was expecting king e2 though. And after that, he planned to win with king c3. Because after h6, king c2, the black pawn is queening with check. And if white doesn't play h6 but goes back to block, well, again, he gets mated by king d3. Too bad. What he overlooked in this situation was king c2. Again, we have this formation, and it's enough. The black pawns are no danger anymore, and there's no king c3, and duly his opponent resigned. That's a neat thing to remember. Sometimes this square is much better than this square. The next one is connected to the rook pawn. It's a rook pawn exercise. Black to play, and the question is, can he win or does he have to draw? I invite you for a few seconds to ponder it. The postulation is black to win. Okay, black to move also. First move is quite clear. He has to take the pawn, otherwise the pawn will promote because the white king controls the whole way. So black is taking, but the interesting position arises after these moves. King d4, king b5, king c3, and king c5. And the question now is, can black win? Still the same question, and if so, how does he do it? He has three moves. Well, king d2, we can rule it out because then he actually loses the game. But the question is between king takes c2 or king b2. Which one is correct? King c2 looks good, looks as if it's not really risking anything because another pawn is gone. And after king takes b4, actually black is winning. So if he now takes on a2, he's just one step quicker, and that's all he needs. Queening here, and that's it. But white has a better defense. In this situation, after king takes c2, he has this clever defense. King d4. And after king b2, king d3, king takes a2, king c2, it is a draw actually, because this is quite well known, and after a few times of this, back and forth, finally black has to play a2, and he gets stalemated. And these two pawns don't play any role, don't make a difference. It's the same motive that we know from the rook pawn. It's a clever cage. In this situation, however, black has a neat little trick that he can try. If he doesn't take on a2 but plays king a1, he is seducing his opponent to play king c2. But it's not working in this case, because after king a2, white is in Zugzwang and has to give up his b3 pawn. So what does he do? He plays king d2, staying within reach of c2. So after king a2, he can exert the pressure, and if black doesn't take, well, white just stays in the vicinity of c2. And so in this situation, king takes c2 actually was a big mistake. Only king b2 does the trick. And we see that after king d4, king takes a2, king d3, and king b2, white is completely lost as the black rook pawn is promoting. Talking of the rook pawn, this is one of those optical illusions. White resigned in this situation because he figured king takes f3, king g1, and I'm losing. King g3, h2. White is losing. But in this situation, of course, he had this move, which actually keeps a draw. Black cannot do much, can go back and forth, and we know all this. So f2, and eventually it will be stalemate. Let's have another optical illusion quite quickly. And this is also something that happens much more often than it should. White to play, can he keep a draw or does he have to lose? And the real answer is he can keep a draw. In this situation, he has to choose between king e6 and king e4. And some might think, oh, it doesn't matter, king e6. And after king c5, it's Zugzwang, and he will lose this pawn. White will lose this pawn and will lose the game. And in the situation before, if he plays king e4, he might think, okay, king c5, I'm losing this pawn. And again, I'm losing. But in this situation, it's similar to the one before. It's an optical illusion. You don't have to play king d3, which actually loses. After king takes d5, we have the opposition for black. No, in this situation you play king e3. Much better. You keep the opposition, and black eventually will have to take on d5, and that's the moment that you again oppose him, take the opposition, and now it's a draw. Well-known draw. The last one is Alireza against Magnus Carlsen, and it shows us that even the strongest players in the world are not immune against mistakes. Alireza, as the white player, had fought a very strong game against the world champion. This is 2 years ago, 2020, in Norway, in the tournament in Norway. And it was his move, and he should have just played king d2, keeping the distant opposition and drawing the game. However, even this super strong grandmaster, even in 2020, was already super strong. He is not, as I say, immune against mistakes. He played king c3, which loses immediately. Carlsen played king c5, and Alireza Firouzja resigned, because now the black king is entering, either here, in this case, or he's going around and eventually outplaying the white king in a very careful manner. And now the e4 pawn is falling and white is losing. The interesting thing is that this move was actually a double mistake, or a mistake in two ways, because black now could have walked back to the king side. This little excursion to c3 and back costs white too much time. We will check this out. Black can now even enter on the king side, which is fascinating. He has to do it right, though. If he plays king g5, then we have a draw again. But if he plays king h5, it's a win, because he has the opposition and will enter pretty soon. King h4, and so on. So that was it. That was my little pawn ending lesson. I hope you liked it. If you did, click the subscribe button, click the bell, so you're notified when future videos are released. Take a look around in the channel, on the channel, within the channel, to see my other videos. 2 more are in English, and there's many more in German. So if you know some German, check out the videos in German. If you want to learn German, take a binge watch through my channel. Thank you very much for watching, for solving along. Have a safe way home. See you next time.